Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
And what he had to say was, he told me, he says, just keep it simple. So I would like for y'all to help me welcome Po' Boy.
Thank you, Chief. I'm Po' Boy Rice, and I'm an alcoholic. Hey, y'all. Sober today by the grace of God. Fellowshipping with men and women just like you, and because our program works. Hey, Nancy. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dot and the committee for allowing me this privilege to be down here. I never have been to one of these homecomings before, but I'm having a ball. I don't know about you. I'll guarantee you I'll put away some calories. My sobriety date is December the 12th in 73. And that may not impress some of you folks out there, but it just tickled the hell out of my kinfolks. I think I ought to tell you in the beginning that I'm just a little bit old-fashioned and I'm kind of countrified. You never would have known that if I hadn't told you. Bob P. over here told me, he said, Po' Boy, I'd appreciate it if you'd say something nice about me when you get up there. And I started to do it. And then I remembered something my sponsor told me one time. He said, Po' Boy, if anybody ever lets you talk, there's three things you got to do. You stand straight behind that podium, and you look straight at those people out there, and you tell the truth. So I think I'll just leave it at that. I notice there's some elderly people here. And I was thinking there might be some of those people that might have known Po' Boy before I got to this program, so I want to tell you a little story. And this was about an old buddy of mine over in North Carolina, and he stole a man's milk cow, and they gave him 12 months in the chain gang. And when he finished his sentence, he was so ashamed of himself until he moved down in Georgia. He got him a job, and he went to work. And he started attending a little old Baptist church down the road. And he established such a good record in the community and in the church until after a while he was elected to serve on the deacon board. And he served in that capacity for some time. And after a while the preacher resigned, and they asked this old buddy of mine if he would be the preacher. And he accepted. And on the first Sunday morning, he walked up in the pulpit to deliver his sermon. He looked down the aisle and he saw a long-legged joker come walking in that he used to be in the chain gang with. And he started his talk off something like this. Now, Brothers and sisters, I came here this morning fully prepared to preach to you from the book of John. But after observing this great congregation, I have changed my text to the 2nd chapter of Jude, where it says, if you knows anything, or if you sees anything that ain't already leaked out, you keep your mouth shut till this meeting's over with. And that's kind of the way it is with po' boy. I did quite a bit of research before I found out there ain't no 2nd chapter of Jude. But it worked. Well, thank God we can laugh. I love to laugh, and I love to see other people laugh. But when I laugh, I have to remember that one day I cried. How about you? Yes, Lord. That textbook that I read says, why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered and been given the power to help others. And we're sure that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And I'm going to have a ball. In trying to follow the guidelines of this program, it says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. And that's the part I like to talk about, is what it's like today. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to touch on some things that are not too pleasant for me to think about. I was born a little over 74 years ago over here in Rockdale County, where I live today. And my old daddy was a sharecropper and a moonshiner. And I think we were about the poorest folks there was in Rockdale County. We lived in an old house over in the field. And I suppose by the time I was 10 years old, I could operate a liquor still as good as my old daddy could. I knew all the ingredients that went into a batch of beer that would cause it to ferment. And when it was, all right, get me some water, buddy. When it was ready to be distilled, this is my spiritual advisor. And I can remember on this farm where we lived, we were sharecroppers, and the big man who lived up on the hill, he had a commissary. And sometimes we'd have to go up there and get a little snuff or tobacco or something, and we never did have no money. And there was black people, and them poor white people didn't go to the front door, you went around to the back door. And I can remember standing there with my old daddy so many times and watching him stand at them people's back door with his hat in his hand and say, would you please let me have this or let me have that? And I resented that. And so those resentments started real early. And that attitude, one day I'll get even. I'll never beg. And I don't know just how old I was when my old daddy moved us to Atlanta. Thank you, Dr. R. We moved into a part of the city, if you know anything about Atlanta, you'll know about this neighborhood. They called it Cabbage Town. And then, as it is today, it was a real slummy era. And I think everybody that lived on the street we lived on was a produce peddler or a bootlegger. And every little old boy that I began to associate with was a graduate from some reform school, or he was a candidate for some reform school. If he hadn't been, he was on his way. And now we all know what it's like to be young at some time or another. We like to be accepted by the people that we're so closely associated with. And of course, I'm no different from anybody else. I wanted to be accepted. And I began to do the things these other guys did. And sometimes when some of these kids' dad would buy them a bicycle, my old dad was so poor he couldn't buy one, and I'd steal one. And a little later on, some of these kids' dad would buy them an old hot rod. And my dad couldn't buy one of those, and I'd steal one. So I always had just as much as the rest of the kids, but mine was all hot. Now, they don't do this in Georgia today, but they did then. And this was back in March of 1929. And I was 16 years old, and they had me up in that Fulton County courthouse. And I never will forget what that judge told my mother. He said, "I'm going to send your boy to the chain gang and let him see what it's like out there, and then I'm going to turn him right back out, and I'm sure that your boy will be a better boy." And of course, we would believe anything that anybody told us, especially the judge. And I went off to the chain gang, and I expected to get out that night or no later than the next morning. That's what the judge said. But it didn't work that way. They kept me 4 years. And so once again, of mixing and mingling with the people that I was so closely associated with and wanting to be accepted, I had become a real smart aleck. Now, I got another name for that. I thought I had all the answers. I hated everything that stood for law, honesty, decency, and respectability. And this is what I was like 4 years later when I came back out on the streets of Atlanta. And I drank liquor day and night. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I had my first drink of liquor. I was probably in diapers. My whole family drank liquor. My daddy made it. The people that we associated with drank liquor, and we didn't see anything wrong with it. If it was possible, it seemed like my mother, she was just more than mama. She was like many mamas today. Her boy couldn't do anything wrong. And she upheld me in everything that I did. And then, like many young men today, I took my mother for granted. You're my mama. You're supposed to do all these things. I've done a lot of inventory work in the last few years. And I can remember so many times when Mama wouldn't have streetcar fare, and she'd walk in the rain or whatever down to this old chain gang camp to bring me a sack of Bull Durham smoking tobacco and say, "Mama loves you, and we hope they'll let you come home sometime." But this was Mama, and I took her for granted. And just a few days after being released from the chain gang, in a drunken stupor one night on the outskirts of Atlanta, I wrecked an old automobile and I killed Mama. And I never got over this for a lot of years and a long ways down the road. And I could hear Mama crying, and I could hear her pleading and begging me to slow that car down, and I wouldn't do it. I was a smart aleck, and I lost Mama. And then I began to run with some of the worst people in this country. And a short time later, I was arrested, tried, and convicted, and this time I was sentenced to serve over 100 years. And so I went back to the Georgia chain gang, and my only hopes of ever being out again was to run out. And I run all my life. Run, rabbit, run. And I escaped, or I attempted to escape from every institution I was confined in except the last one. Most of those people that I was so closely associated with are not around today. Some of them were shot down and killed trying to escape. Some of them was killed out on the streets of the highway by our policemen. And some of them went to the electric chair. It is a miracle, because it is by God's amazing grace that this old drunk stands up here this evening, and I'll try to share a little of my experience, strength, and hope with you. This was back in the days when they used the old stocks to swing you up in for punishment. And they used the old sweat boxes, and the type they used then was made like a coffin. It stood up on its end, and you backed up in it, and they'd close that door right up against your face. And they would bore holes in there for you to breathe through, and you couldn't turn around and you couldn't sit down. And I've stood in those things till my feet would swell up and bust my shoestrings. And they whipped me with everything imaginable, and I continued to get worse, because you don't win people like this. Sometimes people ask me the question, "Po boy, how do you win people?" And I like to talk about that. And there's a little old four-letter word that says L-O-V-E, love. Thank God for this kind of love I'm talking about. I've seen it move men that you couldn't move with a Thompson submachine gun. And one day, I found out somebody loved old Po boy, and how in the world they could, I don't know, but they did. And this began to make a difference in my life. The federal government built a prison right over there in Tattnall County. Big Joe carried me over there today, and we'd done some riding over there. It brought back a lot of old memories. They leased it to the state of Georgia, and they gave them 30 years to pay for it in. And the last year that Governor Eugene Talmadge was in office, he taken all the money out of the treasury and paid the federal government off. And the next morning, the headlines in the Atlanta Constitution said the state of Georgia now owns a state penitentiary, lock, stock, and electric chair. I was one of the first convicts to enter that new prison in October of 1937. And they locked me in a little old cell for 8 months until they could open up a rock quarry for incorrigibles. And I was shipped over there, and I remained over there for the next 3 years. But I managed to escape on 2 different occasions out of that quarry. And they sent me back to Reedsville under what they call a stop order, never to be transferred out again. And a short time later, we got a new warden down there. And out of 2,500 convicts, he picked 10 of us with the worst escape records and said, "Carry these men to maximum security. They'll never come back to population as long as I'm warden." We had a lot of friends and we had a lot of connections. And 30 days later, we escaped from maximum security at midnight. And we came downstairs and we captured the whole inside of the penitentiary. Now, this never happened before, and it's never happened since then, but it did happen then. We're taking over the front office, the powerhouse, and the switchboard. And I walked down through those cell blocks with a market basket full of keys, and I turned everybody out that said they want to run away. So I let 100 out. We threw that main switch, and we had a complete blackout. Everything inside, outside, tower lights, all went out at one time. And there was 25 of us went out those big front doors and taken automobiles off the yard and left. And the other 75 I turned out, went down and broke into the commissary and got all that juicy fruit chewing gum and brown mule chewing tobacco. They didn't want to run away. They were just full of larceny and wanted to steal something. And yeah. And the governor, he offered a $1,000 reward, dead or alive, for every one of us. And within about a month's time, we were all back in jail somewhere, with the exception to one little old 17-year-old boy, and he got drowned in that river down there that night. And they started what they called an 8-ball squad. Our heads were shaven, and those old pick irons welded around our legs, and we were placed out in a stump digging detail. I went over and looked at that field today. And every state troop in the state of Georgia would have to come down there 10 at a time and do 10 days guard duty over this detail that they'd know these men anywhere on site. We were not allowed any mail, any visitors, no outside connections, and of course we had no money. Life looked pretty hopeless in those days. So many of these men began to break their arms and to break their legs and to cut their heel tendons, their heel strings, and some of them crippled themselves for life. And so the word eventually leaked back out up to Atlanta, and the newspapers got a hold of this. And the governor picked a group of men to come to Reedsville and make an investigation. And he picked the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, a lot of judges, probation officers, newspaper reporters, photographers, and one other man I'll never forget as long as I live. His name was Mr. Wiley J. Moore. Mr. Moore was a millionaire banker in Atlanta. And the governor asked Mr. Moore to head up this group and said the state of Georgia will back you men up 100% in any recommendation you make. And so they came down there. We were driven out of these old muddy river bottoms into that old dark cell house. And Mr. Moore said, "Open the door. I want to go in here and talk to these men." And they said, "You can't go in there. It's too dangerous." And this was the first time in my life I ever heard anybody talk about God in a respectful manner. Mr. Moore began to talk about the God of his understanding, and he said he was not afraid to go in there. And that got my attention. They opened the door, and he came in, and we followed him to the rear of this old cell house, and we sat down in a big circle. And Mr. Moore sat down in the center of this group with tears just flowing down his face, and he brought us a message. He talked about the God of his understanding. He said, "You can't buy this. It's not for sale." And the most amazing thing of all, he said, "You don't have to be good to get it. It is a gift. You just accept it." I could not, for the life of me, I could not understand that kind of talk. But I had all the respect in the world for that man because he was for real. I never forgot that message, Bobby. He said, "I'm going to let your hair grow out so you look like a human being. And I'm going to take these old stripes and these old chains off of you." He said, "I'm going to let you pick any job in this institution that you want, that you can learn a trade that'll be worthwhile to you on the streets one day." And he said, "I don't care how many life sentences you're serving, if any man in this detail would just do 5 years with a perfect record, I guarantee you a parole." What an opportunity. There was only one man in that detail that had taken advantage of that great opportunity. And as far as I know, he's the only one other than myself that's still living today. He did learn a trade. He did do 5 years. He was paroled. He's an old grandpa now. He never got in no more trouble. But you know what kind of job I asked for? I asked for a job down there in the stewards department. That's where they got all that meal and sugar and syrup and yeast. Well, I believe we're fixing to identify here. I'm a drunk. And I intended to stay drunk, and I did. Sometimes folks say, "Po boy, how do you drink in the penitentiary?" I got news for you there, hon. It was easier to get over there in Reedsville then than it is over on CONYERS where I live. You didn't have to walk as far after it. Now, out here they call it beer, but in the joint they call it buck. And it ain't nothing but old still beer. And I learned all the tricks of the trade from my old daddy as a little old boy working around the lick still. So I stayed drunk. For the next few years, there was a lot of things that happened. A lot of them were tragedies that I don't talk about. But there was a lot of humor along the way. And I like to look at the humorous side of life. Most everybody got a nickname. They called me Po Boy, and I had a little old buddy there, and they called him Hitler. And if there's anybody in Reedsville that loved that old buck as good as I did, it was old Hitler. And one morning I'd pulled off a batch of buck, and Hitler got drunk, and he got out there in the hallway, and he got arrested on a plain drunk charge. And they had him down at the control office, and the warden said, "Hitler, where'd you get that buck at?" And he bowed over real humble, and he said, "Captain, you can just whoop this old head of mine till it rattles like a pot of okra if you want to. And I ain't going to say one word against my good friend, Po' Boy Rice." Yeah. Now, old Hitler swore he didn't snitch on me. He didn't know how they found it out, but many, many times, just like that week, I'd have to go upstairs and eat bread and water for a few days. So that was the way I was doing time. But I let this little extra privilege I had, mixing and mingling with the other convicts and scheming and plotting and planning. And after a while, I got me an old pistol smuggled in there. And I got up there one morning, I was so drunk I didn't know I was in this world, Harlan. I enticed 5 of those other men to help me. And we captured 19 of those free people and had them all tied up in haywire, using them as hostages trying to go out the back gate with them. I thought I wanted out bad, but I can honestly say this evening, thank God I didn't get through those gates, because I wouldn't have been living today. And anything that I tell you that happened to me, don't you feel sorry for Po' Boy. I asked for every bit of it. And I was in this fellowship for quite a while before I realized and accepted the fact I am responsible for my actions. Those people didn't do it to me, I did it to myself. And so they stripped me off naked, and I was beaten till I was bloody as a hog, and they carried me to the death house. And there I remained for the next 2.5 years, right in the shadow of the Georgia electric chair for safekeeping. I was not allowed any visitors, no male privilege. And if I ever got a cigarette during those 2.5 years, one of those condemned prisoners gave me a cigarette. I've seen an awful lot. They don't use that thing much today, but back during those years, the state of Georgia was leading this nation in executions, and I had a ringside seat. This did not make a Christian out of me, but it certainly did change my attitude about a lot of things. 2.5 years later, I came back to population with a thought like this: when I go again, I'll go out that front door a free man, I'll go out that back gate in a pine box. I surrender, I can't beat you. And in my way of thinking, for the next 7 years, I made what I called a good record. Now, I stayed drunk a whole lot, but I stopped trying to escape. And I'd never made a record like this in my life. And by this time, we had a pardon and a parole board in Georgia. And before this time, all we had was a prison commission, which consisted of 3 men. They were the whole works in Georgia. And so just about every year after we got the pardon and the parole board, they would come down there and interview me and make a recording of it, carry it back up to the Capitol and play it. I'd like to hear one of those tapes today. But after 7 years, Mr. Ed Everett was chairman of the pardon and parole board. And he said, "Po' Boy, we feel like you've been in long enough, but said you've been too closely confined for too many years to be turned out with the public." I didn't know anything about World War II. I had no trade. All I knowed anything about was digging a ditch or digging up a stump out there in the field. Mr. Everett said, "We're going to recommend that they send you back out to a road camp and let you mix and mingle with the people out there, and when you get used to being around folks again, then we're going to give you a parole." And sure enough, a short time later, they transferred me up in Cobb County. And they told my kinfolks that he's up there on trial, and if he'll do good up there for a year, we're going to parole him. And I felt like a misdemeanor then. I'd count the months off and the weeks off and the days off, and till that year was up, and they sent me a letter and said, "Stay another year." And I like to have missed the boat. I couldn't understand that kind of stuff. I come to find out later on they did this for psychological reasons, to see if I could stand a little disappointment. We do run into some disappointments occasionally. And I was a real weak individual, and I almost missed the boat. And I had a thought like this: when my sister comes out here Sunday, I'm going to get what little money she's got, and I'm going to leave, because I could have left. But all these years I had been gone, my little old brother and sister had grown up, and they had families of their own. And they had all become church people. And I never could understand why they didn't talk to me about God. I guess they thought I was just a hopeless case. And so as they came out there that morning, I was so bitter, and I wanted them to feel just like I felt. And they just dropped their head and began to cry, and I didn't know how to fight anything like this. I look at it this way: all the way down through life, at different times, different happenings, there were some little seeds planted. Mr. Moore planted a seed down there in that old cell house that day. My sister planted another one that morning. And eventually those little seeds began to sprout. And they began to come toward your surface. Until, thank God, one day they blossomed out in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. My sister said, I know you don't have a God, but I do. Don't do anything till the Capitol opens in the morning. Let me go back up there. And I owed my sister a lot, but she had run her legs off for many years trying to help me. But then, just like my mother, I took her for granted. You kinfolk, you're supposed to do all this. The very next day when I came in, they said, "Po boy, you stay in tomorrow. They're going to carry you up to the Capitol. They want to talk to you." I couldn't hardly sleep on that old hard bunk that night for thinking about a God somewhere that Mr. Moore knowed about, that my sister knew about. So they carried me up to the Capitol, and there's a lot of people up there representing me. I didn't know them. They're just friends of my family. And they said, "We're going to reconsider, and we'll let you know what our final decision is in a couple of weeks." And it was just about that long when I was paroled. And I'd been in 20 years, 1 month, and 2 weeks that time. And back in those days, when you made parole, somebody'd have to come pick you up and carry you home. And they'd have to bring you some clothes to wear. And I never will forget, my sister brought me a sports shirt and a pair of slacks. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever owned a pair of breeches with a zipper on them. And that really turned me on. And I'd catch myself standing in front of the mirror going, zip, zip, zip. So that's what I was like when I come home. And I went to live with my sister. And every time the doors of the church were open, my people all went to church. And it was sort of a take it or leave it proposition. Now, you can go with us or you can stay here by yourself. And so out of curiosity, I went. And I went for all the wrong reasons. I met a lot of wonderful people, people who wanted to help me. But a person that lived like I had so long with that guard up, that wall I'd built around myself, I didn't trust people. And I refused the help that was offered. But there was one great thing that came out of me going to church. I met a little lady there, and there's a lot of you people out there know this little lady. Her name was Flo. And a short time later, Flo and I was married, and we rented some furnished rooms. And 2 men in that church got me a job digging ditches for a plumbing company. I'm a good ditch digger. And I went to digging ditches, and me and Flo would go to meeting on Sunday. And I didn't drink liquor. And after a while, they gave me a dime raise and made me a plumber's helper. And I stayed with that, and I didn't drink liquor. And eventually, I got one of those little old journeyman cards that said that I was a plumber. And I went out to Emory University, and I got me a job. I said, now I can make some money. And I worked out at Emory for 2 years, and I didn't drink liquor. Flo and I was going to meeting. And one morning they called me in the office and said, "Poor boy, we hate to tell you this, but your past has caught up with you. This is a big thing in DeKalb County. There's a lot of folks know us, poor boy, and we can't work you out here at the university with your record." And once again, that attitude came back. I'll show you. I'll get even. And that old pride wouldn't let me go home and tell Flo what had happened. She would have understood, and we could have worked it out. And every morning I'd let her put that bread and meat in a sack, and I'd leave like I was going to work, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't want a job. I was full of anger. And that attitude, I'll get even. And I didn't know anything about legalized liquor or beer. And so that next morning I walked in one of those honky-tonks, and I called myself getting even, drinking that stuff. And after a while I'd be in such a condition till I wouldn't go home. I didn't want Flo to see me. And I'd just walk the streets all night by myself and cry and feel sorry for poor boy. And pretty soon I couldn't go home because I was doing some things I ought not have been doing, and the police was watching the house. And I knew I was going to have to run again. And I wanted to see Flo one more time before I run. And I got my brother to go pick her up and bring her out there where South 75 is, a little old motel. And Flo and I spent the night in that little old motel that night. And the next morning I walked up to the bus stop and watched Flo get on that bus going back home. And Lord, I wanted to go home with Flo so bad I didn't know what to do. And I stood there and I cried, and I thought, the most precious thing you've ever had, and now you've lost that. You've bloated again. And I sit there that morning and I cried and I questioned myself, why? Why can't I be like other people? Why do I have to be this kind of person? And I couldn't find an answer. I could not explain me to you because I couldn't explain me to me. I didn't know. I'm an alcoholic. And so I run. And I went to another state, but that liquor over there just like it is in Georgia. And the trouble was I carried the problem with me, and that was poor boy. And the police picked me up in D.T. just crazy as a bat. And they sent me back to Atlanta and put me under a $10,000 bond. And my sister put up the home, everything they had to get me out on the streets, to walk the streets, drink liquor, and feel sorry for poor boy. And I run again. Went to another state. Didn't know nobody there, just drunk, crazy. Put in jail the first night I got there. Was up there in Chattanooga, walking up that main street there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to find somebody that would talk to me, trying to find somewhere I could buy some liquor. Everything closed up, and I saw those neon lights flashing, said fancy wine and liquor, and I said, well, here's one. It sure enough was one, but it wasn't open. And they had that big plate glass window there, and I could stand there and see all them shelves come up there, and they had them quarts and fifths and pints and half a pints. The insanity of alcoholism, and I hit that glass with my fist, and it fell out all over me and all over the sidewalk, and I split my hand. I didn't even know I was cut, and I just filled my pockets full of them bottles, walking on up the street. My pocket was full of blood. My tie was bloody, fishing for a cigarette. And the police run up there and threw a shotgun on me and carried me back down there, and I lied like a dog. I said I didn't do that. He said, how in the world are you going to deny something like this? I said, I don't know, but I am, and I did. And the next morning there was a city detective was trying to question me, and I was about to go into convulsions. And he didn't want me to die on his hands. And he said, I'm going to do something for you. And he went back there and he got a big glass of liquor. He said, drink that. I believe it saved my life. So they kept me in jail 5 weeks, and the grand jury met and failed to indict me. They called me downstairs about 5 o'clock one evening. It was in the wintertime. They opened the door and said, get, and I got. I thought they'd made a mistake, and I run 5 blocks, but I said, now, them folks ain't all that crazy. Something done happened. And I didn't know for a few years back, I was in Maryville, Tennessee in a meeting. And I run into a judge from that city over there. And we were talking about that. He said, poor boy, said, 31 years ago, I came into AA and said, I got me a job on the garbage truck. And so after a while, I became a city fireman. And then I became a city policeman, or a city detective. He said, today I'm the judge. He said, that old boy that gave you that drink of liquor that morning was a member of this fellowship. Said he's done gone on to that big meeting in the sky now. But said he knows more about you than you did about yourself. And said he's the man that went before the grand jury in your behalf and said if you just turn that idiot loose, he'll go back to Georgia and we won't have to fool with him. And how true that is. And so I made my way on back to Flo to get what little money she had and walked the streets and drank liquor and feel sorry for poor boy. And about this time they turned an old buddy of mine out of the penitentiary. We'd run together for about 50 years. And one evening we was going up that 4-lane highway right near Marietta there, both of us drunk in an old beat-up Ford. And we had a flat tire and we didn't have a spare. So we went across the road to a filling station. We bought a tire, and the man said, pull your car over here, and I'll put it on for you. So here's two drunks trying to get across that expressway, and there's a Thunderbird dealer, and his family from up in Ohio was on the way to Florida on vacation, and they run over us and tore up our car. And we jumped out and took theirs away from them. That just seemed like the normal thing to do right then, you know. The law frowns on that kind of stuff. It wasn't so much as what we'd done, but because of our past. And so they gave me and that old boy 20 more years apiece. And they sent us both back to Reedsville. And if I'd have had the nerve, I'd have cut my throat. I couldn't see no way to live 20 more years in there. And I didn't know how to pray. Thank God Flo did. And I'm sure some others did, because I like to look at it this way. About 14 months later, I believe God answered somebody's prayer. They was building a new prison over there in Stone Mountain Park at Stone Mountain, and they sent me up there to put the plumbing in that new prison camp. And we put the plumbing in that new prison camp, and the camp was finished. The warden had us to install a little chapel out in one end of the mess hall. And he called me out on the front. He said, poor boy, I got a different assignment for you every Sunday afternoon. He said, we're going to have a different church group from all over this area. They'll be coming out here holding services. And he said, I want you to stand by the door and welcome the visitors when they come in. He said, I'm going to get some song books, and I want you to lead the singing. And he said, I want you to go back there in those bullpens and form a choir out of them convicts. Huh. And of all the silly things, I wanted to do it. Our program tells us half measures avail us nothing, and I never have believed in straddling the fence. I believe in being what you are. And I didn't know how to pray, but I'd seen a lot of people pray over in the death house. And I found me an altar, honey, and it was an old black burnt hickory stump down behind what used to be the game ranch in that park. And I'll never forget it as long as I live, when I dropped down on my knees by that old stump. And I said, God, if there is a God, whoever you are and wherever you're at, I give what's left, old poor boy, to you, Lord. I ain't going to run no more. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of that old way. Something happened. And I ain't smart enough to explain it. But since that day and since that hour, I never wanted to rob, steal, or kill nobody since then. I want to share something else very important with you. He left me an alcoholic. And I hope I don't ever see that day when I think I'm cured, because I've seen what happened to some of those people who thought they got cured. I went back in there and I did what the warden asked me to do. I welcomed the visitors. I led the singing. I formed a choir. And the good Lord sent one of those honky-tonk piano players in there, and I put that joker to playing gospel music and formed a quartet. And the warden let me go out in the front yard with a bulldozer, and I built a baptizing pool and run hot and cold water out there. Oh. We turned it on. You know, I still had that number on the seat of my britches, but Flo could come out there on Sunday afternoon and sit in them services. And I sort of felt like I was free. Something had happened. And I look at it this way, this God that I talk about don't have to be in a great big hurry about nothing. He's always right on time. And I did that for the next 5 years. And one morning somebody said, "Po boy, I just seen Flo go around the corner up there with your Sunday britches, and it like scared me to death. I thought some of my kinfolks might have died, and maybe they'd got a court order, and I was going to the funeral." But that was not the case. Miss Rebecca Garrett was still living then, and she was chairman of the Pardon and Parole Board. Maybe she still had a little faith in me, I don't know, but somewhere between 6 and 7 years she decided to parole me again. And Flo and I went home that morning, and we didn't know hardly how to talk to each other. We couldn't have hired a lawyer. We didn't have $1.50 between us. But we knew where our help come from. We knew. God had something else for poor boy to do. I went back to work at plumbing work for 3 years, and I got involved with a big church, gospel singing. Went 3 more years. I'd been on the street 6 years, and I hadn't had a drink. Took a job as maintenance man at a big motel with Shell Oil Company and Standard Oil Company. With the conventions they had, the liquor and the beer flowed real, just all over the place. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I'd been on the street 6 years and hadn't had a drink. And one day I decided I'd drink one of them good old cold Budweisers. My friends, when you read in that textbook that this is a progressive illness and it always gets worse and never gets better, please believe it, because it's so true. How do you know, po boy, personal experience, which is the best teacher of all times? And I got drunk. And I stayed down flat 1 solid year. I thought I knew what fear was. Never in my life had I known the fear I did the last years of practicing alcoholic. Nobody knew what to do with me. I couldn't help myself. Flo didn't know what to do with me. And somebody told Flo, said, "Put him over on Peachtree Parkwood." So she put me in Peachtree Parkwood Hospital. I went in there drunk and come out drunk. Back in those days, they had a little deal going out there. They were going to taper you off, Nancy. And every 2 hours around the clock for the first 3 days and nights, you could go up to the nurse's stand and they'd give you 2 ounces of 180 proof alcohol and a little fruit juice. And you better believe every 2 hours around the clock, I'd be standing there waiting for my medicine. So I was drunk and crazy when I came out of there, and we'd spent what little money we'd saved up, and the insurance was gone. And from then on, I'd have to go wherever they'd take me, and I made the rounds. I made them all. I was in and out of them places so fast, it's a wonder I hadn't died from exhaustion before I ever got to Alcoholics Anonymous. The last alcoholic hospital I was in was over in GMHI. And I think it would have probably been the same old merry-go-round with the exception to one thing. On Monday night, they had an AA meeting out there. And they announced on the loudspeaker, we got an AA meeting out in the lobby. And so once again, out of curiosity, I went out here to see what these cats is putting down. And a very dear lady friend who runs a rehab center up there in the city where I live today was in that meeting that night. She said I looked more like a dead man than anybody she'd ever seen. And she came over to me after the meeting and said, "Po boy, do you want to get sober and stay sober?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I sure do, but I can't do it. I don't know how. I can't do it." She said, "I'm not going to try to tell you how to do it, but I'll be glad to tell you how I did it." And that got my attention again. Here's somebody going to share something with me, how they did something. She gave me her telephone number. And that was the most important phone call I ever made in my life. When I left that hospital that morning, I called Sue. And she got the little meeting book out. She looked up the closest meeting where I was living at in Stone Mountain, the Glen Haven Stone Mountain group, where I'm a member today. She said, they got a meeting over there tonight, and you get yourself over there. And I went, very suspicious, very skeptical, very doubtful. I figured they'd ask me all kind of questions, you know. Who sent you over here? You have been convicted of a felony? You know, they asked me that everywhere else I went. And I decided I'd find out who the president was, you know, and lie about everything he asked me. And that was my attitude when I got there that night, and it was a discussion meeting. And I sit there and I listen to those guys and gals that say, my name's so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. I thought, my God, if that's what an alcoholic is, what am I? From where I could see those people and from where I was, it would have been a high step up for poor boy to get where I saw those people. And I said, Lord, let me be an alcoholic. I don't want to be poor boy Rice. I know there's a lot of people have trouble with step 1, 2, and 3. I didn't. I was glad to find out that maybe there's some hope for poor boy. If I can just be an alcoholic like these people and find out what they are doing. And I said, what do I have to do to be like you folks? And they knew I was a nut, and they said, don't drink and go to meeting. If they'd have told me one thing more than that, I wouldn't have known what they was talking about. And so I just didn't drink, and I went to meeting. And after a while, I got the wrinkles out of my belly. I got to where I could eat. And I could lay down at night and go to sleep. Believe me, that was good. I could get up in the morning, put my breeches on, and go to work, and that was good. Don't drink, go to meeting. And I said, why don't somebody give me a lot of credit for all these great things I'm doing? I'm the only man in my home group that ever give a birthday party in 6 months. Nobody thought I could stay sober a year. And they had an old man in my home group there, and I just hated him. Every time he'd open his mouth, he'd say, the big book, the big book, the big book. And I said, how about giving me some credit? I'm sober. Everything's going well at home, on my job. And that night I had 6 months when I picked up a yellow chip. His little old wife come to the meeting and brought me a cake and said, poor boy, 6 months. And the group council had voted you had to have 6 months sobriety to be secretary. And they was going to elect them a secretary that night. Now, you know how them little AA elections go. Somebody said, I nominate poor boy. Second. I make a motion, nomination be closed. Second that. You're it, poor boy. What? You're secretary. And I thought I owned my own group. And now I'm an officer in AA. And I went on and I celebrated the birthday. Boy, that was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. I thought I never had a birthday party in my life. And tonight I got a beautiful birthday party given to me by a bunch of drunks. I like that. And so I lost that high job as secretary and had to come down and be just a regular AA member. Hear me, Keith? That sort of done something to that old ego. And after a while, those meetings started getting dull and boring. And I become very critical of what these people are sharing. My friend, that come as close to getting me drunk as anything that happened to me since I came to this fellowship. I found myself sitting in the parking lot in front of a liquor store one night. I didn't want to get drunk, but I was fixing to get drunk. And I couldn't understand that. And this is when I say God is always right on time, because before I got out of my car, I remembered something. An old man shared with me one time. He said he was in a similar situation and said he prayed and he asked God to help him. I know what they're talking about when they put in that textbook. Once more, at certain times, the alcoholic will have no effective mental defense against that first drink. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And I bowed and said, God help me, God help me. I couldn't help myself, and the help came. I drove out of that parking lot and went back to my home group. And I went to this old guy that was so mean that talked about the big book. And I said, would you consider being my sponsor? Poor boy, he said, I've already seen you celebrate a birthday. What makes you think you might need a sponsor? And I said what I've heard so many people say so many times. Well, my program ain't working too good right now. He said, oh, yes, it is. Your program's working real good. It was your program that got you to our program, and our program is called Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if I'm going to be your sponsor, the first thing we're going to have to do is get rid of your little old program before you get drunk. He became my sponsor. He said, have you ever thought about doing an inventory? I said, I don't know how to do that. He said, I know it. He said, would you start on one if I'll show you what to look for, according to what that big book says? And I said, yeah. He knew how to keep them props cut out from under him. He got me into an inventory. And would you believe I found some flaws in my personality? And when I'd done that inventory with him showing me what to look for, the best I knew how, and I called him one morning and I said, man, I done finished my inventory and I want to do that fifth step. And he said, say what? I said, I done finished the thing now. He said, you got a 12 and 12? I said, yeah. He said, turn to page 50 and read it what it says. 4-step inventory, but the beginning of a lifetime practice. I said, you through yet? No. Well, have you went as far as you can? I said, yeah. He said, bring your inventory and come on over here. Me and Flo went over there that morning. And his little wife and my little wife stayed upstairs, and he had that big book, and I had my inventory, and we went to the basement and locked the door. What a time. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, my friends, I had a spiritual conniption fit that day down in that basement. God, I talked and I talked and I talked and I cried and I cried and I laughed. And when I'd done that fifth step, I want you to picture in your mind, if you can, two big old ugly men, and we stood up and we hugged each other's neck. And never in my life had I told another man I loved him, and I told my sponsor that day I loved him, and he said, I love you, poor boy. It was a beautiful thing, beautiful thing. Well, he said, let's see what the book says next. Following those good orderly directions. And then when I got into making amends and restitution, if I had not had that old boy's guidance, I could have really loused up some things. I know that today. I got one brother that's living, and I love my brother, but I love my sponsor better than I do my brother. We're closer than brothers. That's one human being in this world that knows everything that I know about poor boy Rice. He's closer than a brother. He lives down in Mississippi now, works for the government, been transferred down there several years. I call him once in a while, go down there once in a while. And this is the way I came to this fellowship. And these are the way he led me into this 12 suggested steps of recovery. My friends, I want to share something very important with you. Just because we don't drink liquor, that doesn't mean things are not going to happen to us. They always have and they always will. There's been an awful lot of good things that's happened to poor boy Rice since I came to this program and became willing, with God's help, to follow those directions. And one of the major things that happened, some few years ago, I received something from the state of Georgia that don't many people ever get unless they can prove their innocence, and I couldn't do that. And I received a full, unconditional pardon from the state of Georgia. Free, thank God, free at last. I don't have a record today. It's tore up, gone. And I can walk anywhere in this world and hold my head up with dignity. I'm a child of the King. I'm somebody. Don't have to take a back seat for nobody. It's good. And God has set this old drunk all over this country. Bob knows about it. And I shouldn't know where I couldn't have went if he hadn't sent me. And everywhere I'd go, I'd carry Flo with me. Flo loved these drunks. She loved these drunks. And these drunks loved Flo. In June of '85, Flo and I came out of Albany conference over there. Got back home Sunday afternoon. And the following weekend, I was supposed to have been in Jackson, Mississippi for the convention. And on Tuesday morning, Flo and I were on our way to the Rockdale house for a meeting. And Flo had a stroke. And she went into the Rockdale County Hospital. And they kept her on one of those life support machines for 15 days. And I lost Flo. And that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I suppose I'd been in the Southeastern Conference, Doc, in August. And I said, I can't go. And I wouldn't have went if it hadn't been for Joe Phelan. He said, poor boy, you got to go. You can't stop. You got to go. I'm glad I went, but I didn't want to. Because I could remember every time we'd be sitting in a conference or something, it would come my time to share. And Flo would always sit right on that front row down there. And sometimes my knees would get wobbly, and I'd think I couldn't go on. And I'd look down there, and those big brown eyes would be right on poor boy. Flo believed I could do it. You can say I'm a fool if you want to. I can feel something tonight. Something somewhere. There's a power bigger than I am that gives me this little strength to try to stand up here and share a little of my experience, strength, and hope with you. In closing, I want to share something very important with you. Anytime I'm in a meeting, whether it's a big meeting or a little meeting, my heart and my mind is always centered on that newcomer. Let's don't forget, honey, one day we was new. And let me leave this thought with you. The problem you have today or the problem that may be out yonder in the future somewhere, it is never, never, never greater than this source of power I've tried to share with you this evening. Thank you. God bless you, and I love you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.